What's going on?
Yeah, so we published our freight sentiment indexes yesterday, and the way these work is we ask our shippers, our carriers, and our brokers slash 3PLs how they're feeling about five different subcategories, right? So that includes near-term profitability, longer-term profitability, near-term workforce, longer-term workforce, and then business investment, which is sort of a category that looks to get at how good a time they think it is to invest in new technologies, right? So what we found with carriers was that while near-term profitability is pretty solidly negative, right? It's at negative 8.63, which means that they think Q1 2023 is going to be less profitable than Q4 2022. They're actually trending upward overall. So when you take the average of all of these categories, they're actually improving from last quarter. So they're starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel when you take that longer term look into account.
And Joe, would you say that now we're starting to really see a pretty, I would say, stable bottom that has been built for a few different categories here in the freight segment?
It's definitely starting to look that way, right? And this is some research we did last year. It seemed like the majority of people thought it was going to happen in the first half of this year, with the plurality of respondents thinking it would be in Q1. And there are more and more indications, right, that we are really approaching that floor, right, for dry van truckload, where it's like there's not really anywhere else it can go. Without carriers starting to take a loss. And that's, it's just not the way the market works. So I think that while Q1 is not going to be a good one for most carriers, there is some solace to be taken in the idea that this is probably the worst it's going to get, right? So if you can weather the storm, move on past this, things are going to start looking a little bit better, hopefully.
So knowing that we are either relatively at the bottom or maybe hitting this kind of flattening in the bottom of our curve, we've seen a lot of these carriers, especially as I mentioned on the smaller to medium size, have to close their doors or close their business or even sell off to bigger initiatives, or maybe just say, hey, I'm going to stop running for a little bit. Do you think now, looking into maybe the end of Q1, the start of Q2 for 2023, we start to see more of an optimistic take and maybe see some of those either coming back online or starting to run a little bit more?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think if you were going to see, like, the point at which you would start to see that would probably not be in Q1, if I had to guess. I don't think that there's going to be any sort of like dramatic turning in Q1. Could be wrong for sure, but I think that if that turn would happen, right, the kind of thing that, say, like a smaller carrier that has turned its book of business just to brokerage or whatever. For that to change, I think that's got to be Q2 or potentially even later, second half of the year.
And Joe, as we look at Q2 in the second half of the year, from your perspective, what would that recovery potentially look like? Do you see something as a sudden drive up or maybe a slow and steady increase?
Yeah, it'll probably be a little steadier, right? Like it's not like, I don't think demand is going to just like go through the roof. I mean, obviously, tons of things that we can't predict now could happen, but I think it would probably be just a steady rise up, right? I mean, you have to imagine, well, Anthony, you obviously know this, you're talking about this all the time, but like, this year is probably going to have a lot of headwinds, kind of macroeconomically. So the environment is not one that would really facilitate like a giant jump in demand that would make the market, way more profitable for carriers.
So let's talk a little bit about pricing power and where that kind of lands based on this freight sentiment, right? We obviously saw a massive swing in who held the pricing power as we moved through the COVID-19 pandemic. Shippers have had a good run of it. Carriers obviously started the pandemic with a pretty good run of it. Where do you think that we settle now? Are we somewhere kind of in the middle where it's up to more market conditions really managing the pricing power now as opposed to one side over the other?
Yeah, that another really great question. So I think that what the freight sentiment indexes showed was that we did move toward a bit more market parity this quarter. Like, now that we are at the bottom, right? Like there's not much more that the pendulum could swing, right? There's not that space. So kind of the only way to go would be for the pendulum to stop in the shipper's favor, favor, or to start swinging back the other way, which I think it will start to do in Q1. And the reason for that is just like there's not really anywhere for truckload rates to go. I think we're approaching that bottom, and so. I think that the market is becoming slightly more balanced. I don't know that it's going to change dynamically from, shippers being in control to carriers being in control in the first half of this year, potentially not this year at all. But I think we will start edging toward that, certainly by Q2.
And Joe, as you look at all the factors at play here, are there any underlying trends that could be a sudden shock or stoppage to any type of recovery?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm really interested in is so we're talking about shippers, right? The market is better for them than it has been transportation wise. For the last 3 years or whatever, 2 years, since COVID, right? I think that rightly so, a lot of these companies are feeling pretty positive about their position, and for good reason. But one of the things that Zach Strickland pointed out recently was, the Logistics Managers Index showed that inventory levels were actually growing at a faster pace in December than November, which could be due to some holiday stuff, right? I mean, it's not like that is going to stay the same come the January reading. But what that means is that, unless inventory levels start coming down, into contraction territory on that index, it would suggest that there's going to be excess inventory that's going to be cutting into shipper profits. And I think that is something that maybe, I don't know. I think it could unexpectedly affect their year if they're not careful about it.
So, Joe, obviously we do this Freight Sentiment Index research and pull that together, publish the results on FreightWaves.com. What other research segments are you looking at getting together with those results coming up soon?
Yeah, so we have the shipper rate report that we're putting together now. We also have a carrier rate report that pulls some data from these surveys that we send out. My colleague Michael Rudolph is writing the shipper rate report one this week, and I'm working on the carrier rate report. And we'll hopefully have those published next week, I think is what we're looking at. And there's going to be a lot of great sort of additional information along these lines. What carriers can expect, what shippers can expect, and kind of their place in the market right now.
And if people are sitting here wanting to participate in your surveys, how can they make sure that they get on the list to do that?
Yeah, so the best way to do it would be to sign up for newsletters on FreightWaves.com and just make sure you specify your industry. So if you specify that you are a shipper, the company you work for is a shipper, that will categorize on our back end so that I can send you surveys moving forward.
Amazing. Joe, thanks so much for joining us this morning, and we'll be looking forward to some of that additional research that's coming out.
Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
You as well, Joe. Take care. Right now, we're going to head on over to the wall. We're going to get caught up with our first carrier update of the morning with Tony Mulvey and Donnie Gilbert.
Welcome into this carrier update. I'm Tony Mulvey, joined by Donnie Gilbert. Donnie, seen some, positive things here in the market in terms of a volume side on the dry van side. Rejections kind of stalled out.
So we got volumes here in blue, and you see volumes, of course, this is the holiday, Christmas and New Year's. We get out of our 7-day rolling average with the zero values. We pop back up here. We drop down, which is kind of as expected, but we see a little dip here, down, back up. Well, we did kind of have we had MOK Day in there. Mm-hmm. Now, MOK is a federal holiday, but not every shipper and receiver closed, but some do. Mm-hmm. So we didn't see a zero value to really bring this down like a Christmas or a Thanksgiving or a 4th of July. But we did see it have some impact a little bit. So some this actual volumes that weren't shipping dipped down and come back up. So we were back up to almost where we started. But we kind of want to keep an eye on this. Typically in a January, we'll start the month with higher volumes than when we finish. Mm-hmm. And I do expect that to happen this January. But keep an eye. Right now, we're trending back up, and it's kind of late in the month here. So we'll see how that affects the rest of the the next week and a half.
Yeah, and on the rejection front, I mean, we really stalled after we dropped down from the peaks around the holiday. We've come back down to, I mean, it looks a lot bigger than it really is, but I mean, we're at 3.6%. And
3.6%
stayed there.
Near record lows.
Yeah.
And again, as we talked about, there's two big effects right now pushing rejection rates down. And when the market starts to recover, I don't expect to see rejection rates start to pick back up immediately to show that, unless diesel fuel prices have dropped probably at minimum $1.50 a gallon on the retail side.
Absolutely.
So it's going to be a tough swing for rejection rates right now. All these mega carriers are just going to be sucking up every load they can, whether they can service it or not. This isn't about service for them. This is about keeping their drivers rolling. They know that some of their customers will be upset, but if they can't pick it up today, they'll work in. They'll get it picked up tomorrow, and maybe miss another load tomorrow that was supposed to pick up that day and push it. They'll keep pushing and pushing, and they'll get it worked out to where they get caught up. Yeah,
it's easier for them as opposed to an owner-op with one truck or even a smaller fleet, right, in that 20 truck range, to be able to move flex capacity where it's needed.
Or they'll pull the old game of picking them up with locals and dropping them on the yard, and then they end up sitting on the yard and then getting their OTR trucks to come in and get them. I've seen that play out very, very well. All right, next chart here right quick. We're looking at the National Truckload NTI. I got the NTIL, which is $1.85. This is taking the amount of fuel and taking it out. And then I've got dry van contracted rates. Now, this is a few weeks behind, and you'll see it dip up just a little bit because we had a slight increase here. But currently still in that 260 range. We've been hovering that 260, 265 range here for quite some time. And here it's, over 70 cents higher, 75 cents higher than contracted rates. Both of them not having fuel in there. So there's a big split right here. These spot rates have plenty of room to come up 50, 60, 70 cents almost, and really not affect the fact that these carriers are going to be accepting these loads. So there's a big, big gap in between here. And that's really going to hurt these people that have a lot of exposure to the spot market. They need to get in and jump on and find these contracted rates. We've been saying that for months and months and months.
That's what I was going to say. We've been talking about this. I mean, the spread was at 90 cents to $1 back in the middle of the summer. And we were like, contract rates are going to catch up. Eventually, they're going to hit that decline. And they just never really did. Spot rates, really, I mean, if you draw a line back since August, if you drew it straight across, it's about, the average is probably right where it is right now. So definitely something to pay attention to as we move on. We'll be sure to check in with you again a little later. Right now, we'll hand it over to Kaylee Nix.
Thanks, guys. It's time for a look at your top stories on FreightWaves.com this morning. Hawaiian Airlines pilots could become some of the highest paid in the industry after a tentative labor agreement was formed last week. The carrier will start flying heavy freighters for Amazon later this year. That contract helps lock in labor stability for those Hawaiian pilots. The company reached an agreement with the Airline Pilots Association, which will ink a 4-year contract, boosting pay and putting them competitively in line with passenger carriers like Delta and United. The increase will be an average of 32.9% over the duration of the deal, led by an average 16.6% increase at the time of signing. The assets of family-owned Art Mulder & Sons Trucking out of Michigan will go up for auction today after the carrier closed in late November. The company had been in operations for more than 50 years, but shut its doors after the declining freight market took its toll. COO Greg Mulder said that they were not optimistic about 2023 and decided instead to just close the company. Those assets for sale include 35 trucks, 108 reefer trailers, and 38 dry vans. And Uber Freight is laying off 3% of its workforce, and all of the cuts come in its digital brokerage arm. About 150 employees will be affected by the layoffs in the brokerage division, which will remain separate from the Transplace operations that were acquired by Uber Freight in 2021. CEO Lior Ron said that the company needs to match organization and cost structure to the realities of the market conditions today. The employees being let go will receive severance, extended health care, their 2022 bonuses, and outplacement services. You can find these stories and more up on FreightWaves.com and in our FreightWaves app. If you're watching us on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe to stay updated. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break. We'll be right back with our first check of weather, so don't go away. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our first check of the weather on your Tuesday morning. We're watching a pretty intense winter storm set up across the southern plains right now, bringing mixed precipitation all the way from Oklahoma City down into Texas. We've got a pretty decent amount of snow falling as well coming out of this, so let's check it out. Right now we've got a view from the Oklahoma-Texas state line. This is on Interstate 40 there. You can see they're kind of in the thick of the snow along that I-40 corridor. So between Amarillo and that Oklahoma-Texas state line, you've already got estimates of about 4.5 to 5 inches of snow in some places. We can see the traffic moving on that interstate is few and far between. Those trucks and drivers that are out there this morning are moving slowly. Roads are slushy, if not icy in some spots, and that's going to be the case along pretty much all of your major interstates from the Texas-New Mexico state line eastward into Oklahoma. Let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events where we've got the radar pulled up for you. So we've got those blues, which are going to be the snow, tucked in with the pinks. That's mixed precipitation there. So Oklahoma City is still warm enough to see kind of that rain-snow mix. But just on the other edge, the outside edge of that city is where the snow is starting to mix down into the lower levels of the atmosphere. Same thing out towards the West Texas Panhandle right now, the Lubbock area getting ready to see some pretty intense snow coming out of this because of the pretty high snowfall rates. So we do have winter weather advisories in place and winter storm warnings in place as well. That does include that I-27 corridor from Amarillo down to Lubbock. As far as the major metros, Dallas-Fort Worth Metro looking at staying rain for now, but there is a winter weather advisory in place just to the northwest of them through Denton County up towards the Oklahoma state line. And then Oklahoma City, as I mentioned, seeing that mixed precipitation, but we will turn to snow here in the next few hours. What we're going to watch too ahead of that is going to be the leading edges of that storm bringing some heavy rainfall, some possibility of severe weather, and then even some leading edges of snow flurries and mixed precipitation as well, as there is cold air air already in place in front of it. It's kind of an interesting setup because that warm air really just centered across Texas, and there's already that dip of cold across the southeast. So most of the precipitation as it moves up to the northeast will make that transition over from rain into a mix and then eventually into pretty heavy snowfall. We're going to watch this throughout the next few days because it is going to march slowly up to the northeast, bringing that heavy snowfall from Oklahoma all the way up through the central parts of the Midwest into the Great Lakes, eventually into the Northeast by the end of this week. Total snowfall amounts ranging anywhere from a dusting all the way up to 8 to 12 inches in some spots. We'll talk a little bit more about that coming up later on in the show. Right now, we're going to hand things over to Isaiah Buchanan.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and we have kind of a strange story to start out this morning. I don't even really know how to begin this, but M&M's are getting rid of their famous spokes candies after nearly 60 years. They've been getting a ton of backlash over the past few weeks. They posted this on their Twitter account here recently, and it says, America, let's talk. In the last year, we've made some changes to our beloved spokes candies. We weren't sure if anyone would even notice, and we definitely didn't think it would break the internet. But now we get it. Even a candy's shoes can be polarizing, which was the last thing M&M's wanted since we're all about bringing people together. Therefore, we have decided to take an indefinite pause from the spokes candies. In their place, we are proud to introduce a spokesperson America can agree on, the beloved Maya Rudolph. We are confident Ms. Rudolph will champion the power of fun to create a world where everyone finds they belong. So, very interesting story going on with M&M's. Maya Rudolph apparently is a lifelong fan of M&M's, which I'm pretty sure most people are. So I don't know why M&M's didn't give me a call, but it's fine. She is also going to be the quote unquote chief of fun. So we'll see how that goes. Her marketing is going to begin a little bit. She'll probably be in the new Super Bowl ad that the M&M's are going to have coming up. And things are just going to look a little different for them. I'm kind of upset that we're losing the beloved spokes candies, and hopefully they can get off of this indefinite pause and make their way back into the ads of our everyday lives. And switching things up just a little bit, gas prices are back on the rise. Patrick DeHaan from Gas Buddy posted this on his Twitter account, and it just shows some of the gas prices that are rising across the states over the last week. You can see Colorado had a 28-cent jump over the week, Delaware 24 cents, Georgia, my home state, is 17 cents, and right here in Freight Alley there was a 16-cent increase. So gas prices are going back up slowly but surely. Hopefully we can get a break from those, and then we can start not having to worry about them hitting our pockets as hard. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. But coming up in our next hit, we're going to make Kaylee Nix do something that she has never done before. You're going to make sure you stay tuned for that. And speaking of Kaylee Nix, I'm going to toss it back over to her and Anthony Smith.
I would just like to say that I did not consent to doing whatever Isaiah is going to ask me to do.
Maybe it's a great thing, but
With him, I don't know.
It's touch and go. Also, I am excited that I might be returning to the driving world, but a little bit
Not with those gas
discouraging that
prices?
these gas prices are going up. It's going to be
The longboard it is, Anthony.
longboard it is.
The longboard continues. All right, Isaiah, thank you for that. We'll talk to you coming up in just a little bit. Right now, we're going to welcome in our next live guest. We've got Jack Dahlia with us, our lead writer for Modern Shipper and drone expert. Jack, thanks for being here. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on with Amazon. It seemed like they were pretty hopeful in the drone space for a little bit, and now maybe that's not quite the case.
Yeah, so let's talk about the report that just came out late last week. So as you know, Amazon is already laying off around 18,000 people in total. That's part of a cost-cutting initiative for the company. It's mainly in the stores division, which covers both retail and e-commerce, and the people experience and technology team, which is essentially an HR department. It's dedicated to improving work conditions for associates. So those are the two main divisions that were impacted initially. But we now know from this report last week that the drone delivery division within Prime Air within Amazon was also a part of those cuts. It's unclear just how wide scale they are. There are posts on LinkedIn from former employees that indicate that there were cuts in some form, at multiple locations, including the flight maintenance and the drone technician teams. And then the initial CNBC report said that other teams, including design and systems engineering, were also affected. You also had a LinkedIn post from a former employee, which has now been deleted, that claimed that half of the team at Prime Air's facility in Pendleton, Oregon was let go. That's unconfirmed. Another unconfirmed report claimed up to 80% of the flight operations team was let go. It's important to note that those last couple of reports were unconfirmed. I don't think that I don't see this as Amazon moving away from drone delivery. I think that's important to note. I think this is part of a broader cost-cutting measure for the company, but it still will impact the drone delivery unit's progress moving forward. I think that Amazon's going to try to maintain those two services that it just launched in California and Texas, and it'll take its foot off the accelerator for the time being.
And Jack, of course, Amazon, one of the companies leading the way here in this sub-segment in the industry. With these layoffs unfortunately happening, does this really kind of open the door potentially for other competitors to kind of squeeze their way into the market?
Yeah, I think so, definitely, and I think they already have been. At the moment, we don't know of any other services that Amazon had been planning. So, I don't think these layoffs put the company too much further behind than it already was. Despite being so large, Amazon has moved very slowly on drones for years now. It was one of the first companies to announce that it planned to pursue this idea. But there have been several companies who came later, thinking companies like Alphabet's Wing, Walmart with their partnership with DroneUp. They came to the scene later, but they've been flying more robust commercial services for some of them for years now, while Amazon has been in the air for just under a month, launching those services in California and Texas last month. So I don't think that this setback has been any more significant than some of the other setbacks that Amazon has had so far for drone delivery. Experienced previous rounds of layoffs, drone crashes. There were several reports of drone crashes over the years, including a few last year. The problem, in my view, is that it seems like there's a new setback every couple of months. And that progress overall is moving very slowly. And I think that's allowed some of these other players, Walmart, Wing, you could throw Flytrex, Matternet, some of these smaller companies in there as well, to start sort of steal that market share.
I think it's really interesting because the last kind of 5 years has seen Amazon position itself as a leader in the logistics space, right? They are doing now Amazon logistics really, really well, but maybe they're not as capable of doing the advanced logistics of drone stuff well, right? And I think we kind of see that start to break down when we look at now the issues people are having with Prime and their services, and maybe they're trying to get that drone component in to kind of fix some of those issues with Prime. But do you really see there being kind of like a Band-Aid solution to what's going on at Amazon overall, or is it just kind of they need to stick to where they're doing really well and take some time to regroup?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question, and I've talked to a lot of drone delivery professionals and operators out there, and a lot of them say that it's that singular focus on drone delivery that has helped them to become successful. So I think it is possible that perhaps Amazon has put too many eggs in its own basket. Obviously, you've got Fulfillment by Amazon, which is a massive undertaking that leverages a ton of their facilities. It's an expensive undertaking. You've got Buy with Prime now, which is extending Prime fulfillment benefits like next day delivery and free delivery to merchants who normally would not have been able to offer those things. So Amazon definitely has a lot of endeavors in that space, in that logistics transportation space. And it's possible that drones may just be a casualty of all that innovation that they're doing.
And Jack, you mentioned that some of their initiatives are still on the line here and still at play. Can you talk to what the timeline looks like for some of the current initiatives, if some of them got pushed back, and what's potentially been canceled?
Yeah, so at the moment, we don't really know of any other services or locations that Amazon was planning to launch in. At the moment, it appears that their focus is really going to be on maintaining and really honing in on those services that it launched recently. More specifically, those are in Lockford, California, which is a population of about 3,000 that's eligible for the service. The other one's in College Station, Texas. That's got a population of about 110,000 people, so a larger town. I'm not sure exactly how many people there are eligible for the service, but I do think that that with these cuts that are happening, they're affecting a lot of the different teams, including reportedly design, maintenance, engineering, and things like that. And I think it makes sense for them to focus on the services they've already got off the ground. Maybe take some time to prove that those services are effective, and that could help them moving forward to launch in future locations.
This is purely an opinionated question, so we're not going to take this as any actual concrete forecasting. But Jack, do you think that it would be wise for maybe Amazon to look at maybe partnering with an established drone company who has drone flights that are doing well and maybe outsourcing some of their drone operations to make this work? Or is that a cost that they're just not necessarily looking to incur right now, in your opinion?
I think it might be a little bit painful for Amazon to do it, because I think that they really want to own this drone design. It's something that they've been building for a long time. They just came out with a new design in November that they were very proud of. So I think I'm not sure if they would do it, but I do think it makes sense to partner with another company. Maybe one that's had a little bit more experience flying, has had its drones in the air for longer. There's a lot of companies, and not even just in the U.S., but around the world. You got companies in Australia, in Africa, that have several years of experience because the regulations are a little bit looser there. I do think it makes sense for Amazon to maybe try to partner with one of those other companies, maybe try to inject some of those drones into their network to really get the ball rolling here. Whether or not they will, that is the real question, I think.
And Jack, you're no stranger to the topic of drones. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the other stuff that you're involved in and some shows?
Yeah, so I've got the Drop Zone is my flagship show, I guess you could say. It's a monthly look around the drone industry and some of the tech that is powering it. I've actually got a pretty good episode coming up this month. I'll be talking to Eric Peck. He's the CEO of Swoop Aero. That is an Australian-based drone company. They do a lot of flying in Africa and Australia, two places that I just mentioned. They've been in the air there for a few years now, so that should make for a very interesting conversation. I'm also the lead writer for Modern Shipper, which basically takes a look at the final touch points of the supply chain. So last mile delivery, drone delivery, of course, warehousing, e-commerce fulfillment, all of that good stuff.
Awesome, Jack. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you as always, and we'll catch the Drop Zone on Monday afternoons.
Right now, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
Like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
And welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our second check of the weather. We touched a little bit on that winter storm that is starting to brew across the southern plains, but what we're really going to watch out for these next few hours or so is going to be some really high winds on the front side of the storm. With that, we've got a pretty interesting setup for it because a lot of the moisture is going to remain to the south-southwest, at least when you're talking about Freight Alley here, but we are going to be seeing the overreaching impacts with the strong winds moving through. So let's check it out in sonar critical events right now. We still have that radar turned on, and it's kind of a mess when you look at it, right? So we've got the cold sector across Oklahoma, that snow into the mixed precipitation, the warm sector still with heavy rainfall, and then even some severe weather that is popping up across the southern parts of Texas and the Gulf Coast. We do have an enhanced risk of severe weather today that does include tornadoes, and with this we will see the potential for water spouts that form over the water and then move onshore as tornadoes today, specifically from Galveston up through the Gulf Coast into New Orleans, Gulfport, Mobile, Pensacola, all of the above. But what's going to be very interesting is the strong winds that will be on the front side. So most of this precipitation, the moisture, will skirt up around the western parts of Tennessee and the eastern parts of Arkansas. Leading on the front side of that, some very strong winds for all of Tennessee down into Alabama, Georgia, and into Mississippi. Some places we'll be seeing sustained winds between 25 to 40 miles an hour. Some places we could see wind gusts between 55 and 60 miles an hour. So even though we won't necessarily be getting a ton of impacts from precipitation across the southeast, those strong winds will be something to watch for. Along with that, there is already cold air in place across the southeast as well. We were down to 24 degrees this morning in Freight Alley. So it is going to be pretty cold. That means any precipitation that doesn't make it through that warm sector and cross that boundary will probably be falling as some snow, even some light sleet in that area. Accumulations across the southeast going to be limited, dusting to maybe even just a half an inch in some of those highest elevations, but still something to watch out for when coupled with the high winds. We'll talk a little bit more about weather coming up later on in the show. Right now, I'll hand things back over to Anthony Smith.
Awesome, Katie. Thank you so much for that update. And right now, we're welcoming on our next guest, and that is our very own Mary O'Connell. Mary, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks so much for having me this morning, guys.
So always great to have you on. And today, I'm excited about our topic because we're getting into data, the best ways to use it, and really the most impactful ways that it really can be utilized. What are going to be some of the top headline items that we should be looking at?
So, I mean, everybody is all about data visualization, as well as other visibility tools and ways to improve, end-to-end visibility in your supply chain. But the biggest thing is you can go and buy the biggest, best software that you can. You can go buy the Cadillac of softwares, but if you don't have someone at your business or at your brokerage that can sit there and interpret that data that you collect, you can collect all the data you want, but if you don't have anyone to interpret that data or kind of analyze it and make a plan to go from there, then all those fancy data tools really don't mean anything, because you're just collecting data without someone there to analyze and interpret it and make a plan from it. So I think remembering that part of it is that you can collect as much as you want, but you still need to have that person that will make a plan from that data.
Great, thank you for being here. And I think that's a really interesting point because it really, not to, shameless plug FreightWaves, but I think that really brings to the forefront why market experts like the ones that we have here at FreightWaves are so important, right? That's really the value, is not just having the data that's in your hands, it's having the ability to understand it and then apply it to your decision-making processes. For companies who are maybe looking to bring in some of that expertise in-house, what's something that you really want when you're looking at a data expert or a market expert or an interpretation expert?
I mean, honestly, you want someone that, has some experience with working with data. I would not say that like a data analyst would be the perfect, like, entry-level job for freight and supply chain. But hey, everyone's got their own set of skills. I would definitely say that you want someone that's, been familiar with the industry for a little bit. You're going to want someone that's experienced with seeing the bigger picture as well, because that's another problem that we run into with a lot of these data visualization things, is that people get so honed in on just what the data says that that you need to remember that, like, you have to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Like, it could be the most optimal to run a specific route, but also, like, if it's just completely impractical, that's where you have to have that knowledge and that expertise of working in the industry for a while to know that, oh, okay, well, this isn't realistic. Like, we can do this all day long, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's not very realistic. It's not something that we can implement. So having that knowledge and that industry expertise coupled with the ability to read, interpret, and analyze data, ideally, you'd be a wizard at, moving it around too. But, really, if you just have that market background or that industry background and you can look at the data and make a reasonable plan from there. It doesn't have to be like the golden goose of plans. It just has to be something that you can use to leverage your data and then just keep improving on it from there. Because you don't have to make a big change overnight. It can just literally be as simple as like one step at a time. Because most of the time, your customers that you're working with, especially from a freight brokerage in the 3PL, they're not going to want to change overnight. They're going to want to do small incremental changes, because literally ask anyone that's had to deal with a customer. Customers don't like change, and they don't like quick change. So just basically kind of like handhold them and say, we're going to just slowly feed you another step to improve everything and make it better. And that way it also kind of gives you time to look and see that the steps you're taking, making sure that those are working, and that those are actually being beneficial before you just all or nothing jump in.
Yeah, Mary, I think that's a great point you raised there, and definitely something that our own CEO and founder, Craig Fuller, has really put into action here, making sure that we mix that tribal knowledge with those data analysts and sets as well. When we're looking at a lot of big data, a lot of things that we see, of course, is real-time data really being pushed throughout our industry. But really, what is the relevancy of some of these data sets? Because, I mean, you look at some of these data sets that are being used, and it's a lot of times lagging. Can you talk to the importance of being able to make actionable decisions on some of these data sets?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what we see even in the charts in the market update that we see Donnie and Tony go over every morning. Knowing that information in real time and knowing that sooner, it lets you create a better plan. So if you have data that's a month old, well, we even saw it last year where data a month ago wasn't even as relevant as something that was happening today that was 24 hours old. So I think the more up to date and the more real time that your data is, the better decision making that you're setting yourself up for, because you're not running off a month or a 2 month or a quarterly lag. You're running off of what's happening right now, which is what is going to do the most impact. Because if you're running with data that's a month or two old, by the time you get it and interpret it and then make a plan and implement it, you could be talking about from the time something happened to 3 to 4 months later, by the time you get the plan and try to implement it, because you have to wait a month to get the data and then analyze it and then try to come up with a plan and do it. That's a 4-month lag, which means the stuff that you're implementing could potentially not even be relevant anymore because it's 3 to 4 months old. So if you have a plan that you make off of real time, like 24 a week, like very current data, then you'll know quickly if it's a good idea or not. It still might take a month to implement because, we love customers. They're great, but sometimes they just don't like to change things that quickly, or it takes some time to get the systems all talking. So it's a matter of, the shortest amount of time you can have on your end versus implementation is going to work, because then by the time you implement it, if you get real-time data that's only a day or two old or a week or so old, you're going to know a lot faster if you're your plan or what you've set out to do is working, versus having to wait another month or two after you do it to know if it's something that you should have done. Because if you do something and then 3 months later you implement it and then you have to wait another month or two to know if it's working or if you've made the right call, that's not going to really set yourself up for success. You're always going to kind of be behind and playing catch up.
Mary, let's wrap it up with your opinions on the school of thought that good data doesn't necessarily come fast, and data that comes fast isn't necessarily good. Is that something that we really need to watch out for in the industry, or is it worth taking the risk of your data maybe not being the greatest just to have it in real time?
I think there's a case made for both. So it depends on obviously what you need, but you can get some good data fast. You're going to pay for it, but you can. It's kind of that old thing of like, it can be good, it can be fast, or it can be cheap. You can only pick two. So it's going to be one of those where like you can get some fast data that might be good, might be pretty okay, but it's not going to be cheap. And then at the same time, the cheap data you're going to get is maybe going to be good, but definitely not going to be fast. So it's just a matter of what things are the most important to you. So if budget's the most important, then yeah, probably some older data is going to work well for you. And if budget's not an issue, then any kind of data that you can get fast that's reliable is going to be good. It's just a matter of what are the things that are the most important to you, and also the data sets that are the most important, because some of the data sets, you might have to have a month or two lead time on, and that is the fast data. So I think it's just a matter of what is most important to you and what you're trying to get out of it, because knowing what you want to get out of it will help you more than just getting all of these data access licenses and, going, okay, now I have everything. What do I do? Well, you just paid for half the stuff that you don't actually need. So it's just a matter of knowing what's the most important to you.
Very excellently put, Mary. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Real quick, if people want to find you, when can they tune in to Check Call?
Well, if you keep watching FreightWaves TV, you can just hang on till 12:30. You can watch Check Call, the very first airing of it there. You can sometimes catch it on reruns, but the most reliable way is Tuesdays at 12:30 or anywhere you get your podcasts like Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Awesome, Mary. Thank you for joining us. We'll catch Check Call later on this afternoon. Right now, we're going to toss things back over to the wall for Tony and Donnie.
Welcome into this carrier update, Donnie. We're going to start off with a map looking at what's going on in the van market across the country. There's two markets I want to call out, and it's just the two largest, right? Atlanta and LA, Ontario. I look over Atlanta, obviously the largest market right now by outbound volume, but rejection rates are sub 2%. They're down like almost 1,600 basis points from this time a year ago. So, I mean, you can tell, obviously we know, we talk about it every day, market shifted, but you can really see it in these large markets, how loose the market's gotten relative to based on rejection rates.
Yeah. First of all, I love using these 3D apps, Tony. This is one of the best ways, the quickest ways to get information. And you're right. You look at LAX, you look at Atlanta, you look at Chicago, you look at Harrisburg. What all these markets have in common, they're the biggest markets in the U.S. And if you're a large carrier, then what you really want to do is you want to keep your trucks going into those markets that have a lot of freight, because in times where prices are declining, markets are deteriorating, you need to keep those trucks moving. That's more important than the actual rate sometimes, because you're going to start losing drivers. Drivers are expensive to replace, and that's going to compound itself and end up costing these companies millions of dollars. So they're going to be sending their trucks into LAX. And they're going to be accepting everything. They're going to be sending those trucks LAX to Dallas, LAX to Atlanta, accepting everything. Atlanta to Chicago, accepting everything. So that's where you're going to see these markets that have really low rejection rates, because they know they can focus on some of the largest markets in the U.S. beyond obviously the top 5. And when they go in there, they're just accepting all that freight they can to keep those trucks moving.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the utilization of the capacity that they have that's so vital, because one, they're not making any money if those trucks just have to deadhead somewhere, right? I mean, unless they're making it on the front end, which in a market that's declining, you're not making as much as you were to be able to deadhead somewhere else. And two, like you said, you got to keep the driver moving, because ultimately, that's how they get paid.
You're not going to be accepting these loads that deliver into New Mexico.
Yeah, because
low rejection rates,
where are you
no
going to get volume? Yeah.
And you have to start moving them. So you want to just, they know immediately, if you see a load, don't care where it's picking up at, delivers into LAX, accept it.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out. And you're delivering into Atlanta out of the Southeast, accept it. We'll move a truck, we'll do something, we'll take it. Those are the markets you want to move those trucks to. And that's what, when I worked for a company that had, several thousand trucks, that's what it was. When we got into times like January and February, it almost didn't matter. I see a load come through that was going into Chicago, I was taking it.
Yeah.
And then we'd figure it out. We had to go back and decline it, which rarely we did. Obviously, North Dakota to Chicago, maybe not, but Minneapolis, whether we had a truck or not, I was taking that load, and we would get it figured out.
Yep.
So that's what's going on. That's why I see rejection rates so low, and they have a pretty big impact on how that works. But you still see some that are sticking up here. Memphis, some out here in the Midwest, the western part of the Midwest. This is a very little freight, but Omaha, I always like Omaha. And I picked LAX this time for a couple of loads. Real quick here, the next chart, if we just look at the change, you'll see a lot of the Midwest is turning to red. It's going down. And a few here in the Southeast and Southwest, Laredo, that you see rates that are increasing. And we're going to test out Laredo a little bit as well and look at some of these. So I love my change map so you know what's changed from last week to this week and where you might want to look these up on your market dashboard to see if rates are changing yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Donnie, thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you again a little later. Right now, we'll take a quick break, but we'll be back with more FreightWaves Now.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Let's go. Nobody works for free, so why should we be expecting our drivers to? Okay, let's just get it together now. What are some of those proactive steps that you can start taking now? For myself, I would like the Earth to still be here for a little bit longer, but is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, okay. Is pizza an open-faced sandwich? It's bread.
I have been ready for this question. I've seen the show.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch episodes of Check Call Tuesdays at 12:30 on FreightWaves TV. Keep up with all things Check Call on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation. This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and this is Social Roundabout, where we take a look at what's trending on social media. And Christian Thomas, my partner, helped me find this next video from our very own Justin from Back the Truck Up, and it shows a really cool Guinness trailer that they have out in Ireland. I know the video says the UK, but it's actually in Ireland, so take a look at this video.
This is really cool. Overseas, Guinness uses these custom fabricated tankers to haul the product, I guess, from one plant to another. I've never seen those in the U.S. Have any of you ever seen custom tankers like this?
Yeah, the first time I saw these, I thought they were renderings, but yeah, they're real trailers, and they use them overseas in the UK. But like I said, I've never seen them in the US. If you've seen anything like this, please let me know in the comments.
That is what we need here in America. We need cool tankers like that for different companies, whether it's beer companies, food companies. I'd love to see like a range of different tankers out on the roads. Give you something to look at if you're making a long drive and you're a little bored. At least you got something exciting to look at. Now I also want to show you this meme right here. It comes from Matthew Leffler, the armchair attorney, and it's talking about brokers, carriers, shippers, and it says, if you look in the top left, you see the squirrel. It says, "I wish I could fly like that." And then it goes to the motor carrier. He's like, "I wish I was big like that." See the shipper down in the bottom says, "I wish I could go anywhere like that." And then it says, has this cat as the shipper saying, "I am perfect." And I just find that to be very, very true. Because cats, I'm not the biggest cat person. I'm a dog person all the way. And I just feel like cats, they like to think that they're better than us humans. I really honestly believe that cats think they're better than us humans. I know they rely on us for everything, but they still think that they're better than us. That's all I'm gonna say. So I know last time we talked about I was gonna make Kaylee do something she had never done before, right? Well, today is National Compliment Day. So I'm gonna have Kaylee Nix give me a compliment on air, and it can't be a backhanded compliment. So Kaylee, I'm gonna let you take it away.
Isaiah, you find funny memes. That's the compliment of the day. There you go.
And for those of you that don't know, because Isaiah is usually cut off right around here, he has amazing taste in shoes as well.
Okay, there you go. I'll agree with that one. But he could work on those calves a little bit.
Oh, Kaylee, the heat is coming. All right, so guys, before we let you go for this quick break, we have to tell you about some of the stuff we have coming up, and that is our next virtual event, and that is going to be the Global Supply Chain Week, and it's going to be free, and it's going to be amazing, and it's going to have everything that you could want and more, plus free giveaways every single day.
Absolutely. We are talking maritime. We are talking big, heavy industry, oil, gas, energy. We are talking retail and e-com. Basically 5 days of content. If you want it, we've got it. And as Anthony mentioned, it is free registration with a giveaway every single day. So head on over to live.freightwaves.com and put in your information, get registered right now. And while you're there, you might as well sign up for our in-person events as well. Future Supply Chain coming in just about 5 short months.
That's right. Be there and get to networking next upcoming virtual event so you can be set for that in-person event. Right now, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now after this market update and short segment.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event. But the
There are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
It's a good day coming.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our 10 a.m. check of headlines this morning. The assets of family-owned Art Mulder & Sons Trucking out of Michigan will go up for auction today after the carrier closed in late November. The company had been in operations for more than 50 years, but shut its doors after the declining freight market took its toll. COO Greg Mulder said that they were not optimistic about 2023, and they decided to close the company. The assets include 35 trucks, 108 reefer trailers, and 38 dry vans. Uber Freight is laying off 3% of its workforce, and all of those cuts come in its digital brokerage arm. About 150 employees will be affected by the layoffs, and the brokerage division is separate from the Transplace operations that were acquired from Uber Freight, that is, in 2021. CEO Lou Aron said that the company needs to match organization and cost structure to the realities of the market conditions today. The employees being let go will receive severance, extended health care, 2022 bonuses, as well as outplacement services. The Gulf Coast ports had a great year in 2022, setting records for container volumes. Port Houston set an annual record with 3.97 million TEUs handled in the year, a growth of 14% year over year. The port also set a tonnage record with 55.1 million short tons handled. Steel imports, auto parts, and lumber saw growth at Texas ports as well as in New Orleans and Mobile. Mobile set a container record with 563,000 TEUs handled and intermodal volumes up 142% year over year. The Port of New Orleans leaned on break bulk volumes for its volume records and handled 264 vessels in 2022. Dry bulk and tanker shipping has seen a rough start to the year, with spot rates remaining sluggish for January. However, experts at Jefferies say that the ingredients are in place for a recovery coming, especially after the Lunar New Year holiday. Rates are down mostly because of seasonality and the transient effects of China's new COVID policy, and an upswing should be sure to follow. The Baltic Dry Index fell to just 740 points on Monday, its lowest level since June of 2020. And the BDI is down 41% since the start of this year and 87% since its latest high in October of 2021. And 3 participants in the Louisiana staged accident scam received sentences of probation but no jail time late last week. The 3 were sentenced on charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. All other defendants in the case who pleaded guilty were indicted on charges of mail fraud instead. There are still a few defendants who are awaiting sentencing later on this year. The 3 receiving probation will also be forced to pay restitution and a $100 special assessment fee. You can find those stories and more up on FreightWaves.com and our FreightWaves app. Give us a like and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, and a follow to stay updated on all of our social media platforms. Head on over to tv.freightwaves.com to go ahead and catch anything you might have missed on FreightWaves TV this week. We're going to toss things over to the wall. We've got our next carrier update.
Welcome into this carrier update. And Donnie, we touched on it in the last one. One of those markets that was popping up in some of those change map that we were looking at, Laredo here, we're seeing it pick up both on the volume and the rejection front.
Yeah, so I just kind of want to bring this up real quick. I saw that change there. I kind of wonder what was driving it. So we see both volumes here in Laredo and a pickup in our rejection rates a little bit. So are we going to see pricing change? But I just kind of want to show you how we see this, and when we come up on the lanes of the day, I'm going to pull up a Laredo map.
Yeah, I mean, this is one, right, big cross-border market. You're seeing that uptick in volumes when in a period where, I mean, really, if you look, yes, we bounced back following the holiday, but overall, we've come back out of the peak from the holiday, and we've been down, I guess, from there.
Laredo is the largest border crossing for commercial freight. The reason being is you can take a team and you can be to about any point in the U.S. within 48 hours. So that's why this is a real important market to kind of keep an eye on. And as we get it later on into February, we're going to start seeing a lot of produce start crossing over this market coming up from Central America and Mexico as well.
Yeah.
Let's pop in and check out, see what's happening in the diesel fuel market, Tony. All right, so here in the blue line, we have our retail diesel fuel. And we saw it going back up as we saw the rack prices, the wholesale prices going up. Wholesale leveled off here just a little bit for the last day, 2 days. And it allowed, our retail to go down less than a cent, but at least it wasn't going upward.
Yeah.
And this is my biggest concern because, Tony, margins, everything's going to be really tight for these companies in the first quarter. And one thing they do not need is these fuel prices going back up above $5 a gallon. We've already seen where Kaylee was talking about, one trucking company, 50 trucks, 108 reefer trailers going out of business or selling their assets. I've seen multiple small companies already selling their assets. If something like this were to turn around and go back up, it's going to push more into that position faster, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things to pay attention to, and we'll start seeing it here as earnings releases come out, is these operating ratios, right? Because it's revenue basically over your operating expense, or expense over revenue. And anything over 100, you're losing money on just operating.
Every dollar you brought in, yes.
Yeah, it costs you more. So, best example, if it's 105, it costs you 5 cents, 105 cents for every dollar of revenue, right? So ultimately you're out 5 cents.
Every dollar you bring in.
Yeah.
That's fourth quarter, Tony.
I know.
That's one of the strongest quarters there is.
Exactly.
Now we're headed into one of the weakest. So this is going to hurt it 10 times.
Yeah.
All right, we'll see the spread here between these two here. On the next chart here, it's down to still about $1.09. So we're at the top of that range that we always talked about. I believe if we see it drop any lower, then the reflection is going to be diesel fuel prices getting higher.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be something to pay attention to.
Yeah. And go ahead and bring up our next chart here, the NTI. I went ahead and brought our NTI back up just to show you. This is the NTI D, which is including fuel. And again, we kind of still see this downward trend here going with our spot rates.
Yep.
It's a pretty strong downward trend. How low will we go? It's not over yet, and we've got at least another 2 or 3 weeks that nothing is probably going to stop this downward trend.
Absolutely. Well, Donnie, thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you again a little later. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All right, guys, thank you for that carrier update. We're going to welcome in our next live guest. We've got Harris Lagan joining us, who, of course, heads up Telegraph, talking all about emerging trends in rail and intermodal. Harris, thank you for being here. The first time that we're talking to you in 2023. So let's get just kind of your general take on where the rail space sits right now.
So far, so good. Thanks for having me back. We're really looking forward to the conversation today. So we're on the up and up. I think two trends we're really excited about. So first of all, service in the broader Class 1 rail space is really beginning to trend up. We're seeing train speeds, we're seeing on-time performance indicators that are at or above their 12-month highs. So we're actually really excited to see that. And we're also excited to see a little bit of strength. And I think, Anthony, as you know, rail traffic tends to be a leading indicator in a handful of markets. So grains up, aggregates and materials, metallic ores and metals. There's a lot of good activity on the manufacturing and construction side that we think is going to be really good for the economy throughout the year.
And Harris, I think that's a great point that you bring up. You're looking at grains, you're looking at some of those metals, manufacturing. Are there any particular parts that you're seeing within manufacturing, or are you seeing just really the aggregation of a lot of raw materials really starting to be moved around the country right now?
Yeah, good question. So that I think where we're seeing a good influence from a lot of the government spending, specifically in surface transportation and infrastructure, has been a ton of demand for a lot of the crushed stone, gravel materials that are going to really be constructing roadways, highways, and things like that. That's effectively up about 9% year over year. So we're excited to see that trend. I think one of the other items that I think is kind of an outflow of the conflict over in Ukraine is the grain markets, both in the plains in the United States and in Canada, are up about 30 to 35% respectively. So it continues to be a strong demand for grain, and that export market continues to remain pretty robust.
How does that compare to years previous, before there wasn't as much reliance as U.S. and Canadian held grain, because there was a lot of reliance from that Ukrainian breadbasket, right? Are we seeing now kind of this switch over? And obviously that's really good for our farmers and our agriculture industry here at home, right?
Yeah, good question. I think a couple of trends are happening in the broader macro environment. If you look at broader kind of Europe energy consumption, that has completely flipped over on its head. They were consuming some 40 to 50% in certain markets directly from Russian natural gas. That's now down to 10 to 14% in some areas. So I use that as kind of a barometer to look at how the broader supply and demand shifts are happening more broadly. And so let's walk through that. In years past, you would see strong demand, especially from Canadian and United States grain. The difference was, in years past, the availability of covered hoppers and the rail service may have not been as widely available or as reliable as it is right now. And so I think that's one of the things that's really propelling that market. And because there's less of a kind of global broadly shifted demand, you're having to single source more from direct markets, which here in North America we're directly benefiting from.
And Harris, one of the areas that you, of course, mentioned of government spending and really kind of holding up some of the manufacturing. On the private side, we did see that there was some contraction there in manufacturing activity. We look at the ISM PMI, the new orders component, but there was just such a run up and a pull forward of orders and industrial activity that even though we're seeing contraction in the backlogs component, that there's still a lot of backlogs to work through. Do you see the amount of backlogs to work through from the CapEx side being enough to really kind of keep a lot of activity afloat until we start to see activity pick up again?
Yeah, I think one of the things where railroads really strive to perform well, and I think this is one area where they've always done well historically, is it's less just-in-time activity. And so we think about the just-in-time activity as the package arriving at our doorstep. They are tending to move it more to kind of near shore or closely locate to a major population center. So railroads do a real good job of keeping all the local distribution centers filled up. And so I think that's one area where, as we see kind of what you're talking about, Anthony, is some of that demand is continuing to going to roll out. I think what we're going to actually find is that the availability of goods in our warehouses is actually going to be pretty high for the next couple of quarters, and railroads will actually do a really good job of keeping that supplied. One of the ways they're going to do that, and I think one of the cool things that's coming out in the next couple of weeks as we see earnings releases come out, Union Pacific's committed 3.6 in their CapEx plan for the year. BNSF is now committing to $3.94 billion in their annual CapEx spend. We're going to see more industrial investment from the railroads and their ability to generate capacity and provide better service and locate goods closer to some of the more emerging markets like we see in the Southeast and the Midwest and more of some of those Sunbelt areas. Railroads are going to continue to invest and grow in those markets.
I love that. And it's starting to see kind of the fruits of their labor come together, right, in this opportunity for them to see this growth. Let's talk a little bit about the government pressure being put on the railroads right now. Obviously, Surface Transportation Board still has a pretty close lens at looking at some of these service issues going on. We obviously know that Union Pacific has been under fire for their use of embargoes and their lack of meeting their common carrier obligation and hitting those service standards. What do you think the Surface Transportation Board is really going to hone in on and focus on when it comes to their examination of the Class 1s this year?
Yeah, I was fortunate to hear Chairman Overman speak at the Midwest Association of Rail Shippers last week. He had quite a few things on his list, more than I think an hour was going to allow for. And there are a couple of things they're going to be taking a hard look. I think number one is exactly as you called out, the use of embargoes and how that relates to being able to meet the common carrier obligations. And I think one of the interesting items is that there are ways to get around the embargoes. There are ways to get better access. There are some unique tips that some shippers are able to use depending on where they're going on a certain network. That isn't as widely known, and so I think there is going to be some concern about special favors or specific items that are being conducted by some of the Class 1s. I think the embargoes in general, though, let's talk about that. It's a pretty blunt instrument to apply to a broad section of track to say that you can't ship there because we're not able to handle the capacity. I think one of the things that all the Class 1s have done really well is they're reinvesting in their crews. They're hiring more training engineers. They're hiring more maintenance away folks. They're hiring more mechanical folks. And I'm really excited about that. But to get them trained up, that's a 6 to 9 month lead time. So I think that's going to be an area where they continue to focus, and the STB will be watching those numbers, hopefully continuing to climb. I think reciprocal switching or competitive access is going to be another item that's going to be really big on the docket this month. I think one of the things that we at Telegraph think a lot about is transparency and visibility in the supply chain. The STB is really going to focus in on the ability of shippers to know where their shipments are at, to have competitive rates, and have good access to switching. I think that's going to be something else the STB is going to take a hard look at this year.
And Harris, while you were on that topic of really being able to train up, can you also talk about some of the aspects of automation and what that might play going into the near future?
Look, I think automation in a variety of settings gets a bad rap. I think we're not talking about trying to go to level 9 full-scale autonomy in the train network in the next 9 months. What we're actually thinking about is more of the applied or maybe semi-autonomous functions where you're going to have a remote control operation, operating maybe some hostler trucks at a facility or a terminal. Or even in today's world, you've got conductors that are physically on the ground operating locomotives with remote control operations, simply having a couple of joysticks and being able to handle switching operations in the rail yards today. I think we're going to see more exploration of that. I don't think the edict around having one-person crews is going to be a big item this year. I think where you're going to see some engagement, because railroads are historically the safest way to move goods over land, especially in recent times. I think you're going to see more exploration of how you can use autonomous rail cars or maybe semi-autonomous cranes in certain rail deployed markets to see if we can not only prevent some people from being in a risky situation, but maybe control some costs and deliver a better service product to customers as well.
Amazing. Absolutely great insight here from you, Harris. If people want to get more of you or get in contact with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, harris@telegraph.io, or you can visit us on the web at www.telegraph.io.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We'll be sure to have you on again in the near future.
See ya.
Right now, we're going to head back over to the wall because we have Kaylee Nix with our next weather update.
All right, Anthony, thanks for that. We love always talking to you, Harris, about what's going on in the rail space. Let's move back to that winter weather impacting the majority of the country, because behind it, temperature is going to fall pretty significantly. The very interesting thing about this storm setup is about 2 to 3 degrees of difference is going to make a really big impact difference, depending on what type of precipitation and how much folks are getting. So let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. These are our minimum surface temperatures for the next 24 hours turned on the map right now. We can see colder air definitely starting to dive its way south, and we have kind of this stationary front that's draped across southern Texas and then right along the bottom parts of the southeast, the deep south. And that stationary front is really going to control who sees the wintry precip versus who just sees some rain. And it's also going to help handle where those high winds go. So overall, your minimum surface temperatures right along that mid-central Texas line into the deep south, going to be sitting at the warm side of the storm. in your mid 40s, upper 50s for your lows. On the cold side of that, so again, just a few degrees of difference, we're going to be looking at those minimum surface temperatures dipping down into the freezing mark and then into the mid 20s, some teens possible behind that as well. Coldest air going to be centered across Colorado, Utah, and then up into the northern parts of the Midwest, as we would typically expect for this time of year. But colder air also still going to dip down into your central Appalachians, down here into Tennessee, and then kind of get stuck on that backdoor cold front that moves through Georgia into the Carolinas as well. So because of this, we will be watching for a snow-rain transition, or really just a very tight gradient in your type of precipitation as the storm moves up to the north-northeast. With that, we could be seeing some snow and some rain, possibly even some freezing rain, maybe some ice accumulation, or some in eastern Arkansas, western Tennessee, the Memphis metro area, as well as into Nashville, here into Chattanooga. Could be seeing a couple of snow flurries squeeze out of this storm as well. A couple degrees going to be the big difference maker between who sees rain, who sees snow, who sees nothing at all. We're going to keep a watch on that as we continue to move throughout the rest of the week. That does it for this look at weather. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation, inflation, inflation. This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Welcome into this week's edition of the Research Corner. I'm Tony Mulvey, joined by none other than Joe Antashuk. Joe, how's it going?
Hey, Tony, it's going well. How you doing this morning?
I can't complain. Two appearances on FreightWaves Now in a day for you. So obviously, the topic that you talked about earlier, those freight sentiment indexes, we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into those, kind of break it down by each segment, kind of look at the trends that we're seeing across the board. First one, carriers. I mean, you talked about it earlier. No real surprise to see that near-term profitability decline, but to see upticks elsewhere in that longer-term outlook came as a little bit of a surprise to me. Not really. I mean, when you think, obviously, there wants to be some optimism around this, but I think when you start looking at some of the data, you see, I mean, obviously, longer-term profitability, a big increase. You see that near-term workforce, a relatively big increase. I think that was the one that really stood out as a surprise. especially when you start looking at, layoffs, things like that. But I think some of this is carriers are willing to add drivers in a period like this, which is, or what you're going to see is drivers that ventured out on their own come back into a more of like the umbrella into these enterprise fleets. When you look at this, what came as a surprise overall, if anything?
Yeah. So just as a refresher, if anyone doesn't know what these are, we survey every quarter shippers, brokers, and carriers, and we ask their sentiment readings on a number of subcategories, as Tony was mentioning, right? We have these profitability ones in the near term and longer term, and then same thing for workforce and business investment. And we pull those together to create like an overall sentiment index, right, for each category. And then for the freight, industry at large. Anyway, right. So for carriers, as I was talking about earlier on FreightWaves Now, So the interesting thing about this, right, is that despite worsening near-term profitability expectations, they dropped down to negative 8.63. Their overall score actually went up, which suggests that they're actually starting to think a little bit more positively, right? They're feeling like down the road they're going to be better off. And really the way to think about this is that, like, when we ask longer term questions, we're asking 12 months from now. So the difference last quarter is we're asking them about Q4 2023 versus now we're asking them about Q1 2024, right? So once again, we're seeing there's this new piece of data where it's like there are a lot of question marks for carriers and just throughout the freight transportation industry in 2023, but come 2024, that's when, right, carriers think that things are going to be looking up a little bit more for them. At the very least, the market will be more balanced than it currently is.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point. And looking out that far, if you think really this freight recession that we're in, where we started to really see this collapse in spot rates and volume levels, started back middle of this year. If you think a cycle typically before from top to bottom and then starting on the rise, you're talking in that 18 month range. Well, that puts it right in that Q1 of 2024. So not really a surprise. We'll bring up a chart here that kind of hints at or talks to some of that near-term profitability, that decline in sentiment there. We'll pull it up. It's our NTIL, so that National Truckload Index line haul only, so ex-fuel, and our contract rates. And you can see we've come down off the holiday peaks on the NTI and that white line, but then we've also come down on the contract rate side, looking at that green line over there on the left axis, still elevated where it was. But even if you compare it to any point in Q1 of last year, we're at a lower level than that. So I think that drives a lot of that profitability sentiment. And I think that's going to be a theme you'll see throughout really the first half of this year, but hopefully, like you've mentioned before, we see it in the second half. Any thoughts when you see the sentiment talked about from in the survey results, and then you compare it with that sonar data? It doesn't really come as a surprise to me, does it to you?
Well, you work on a project like this, I think you are pleasantly surprised when you can see a storyline that seems to line up right with the data. The fear would be that these sentiment indexes were totally out of line with reality, which thankfully is not the case. But you don't always know, right? So it panned out okay. And I think we also have like the chart for brokers and 3PLs. I wanted to talk about that a little bit because I didn't get a chance to on FreightWaves Now, but it's interesting because they were in positive territory for near-term profitability in Q4, right? So that means that they thought in Q4 they were going to be more profitable than Q3. And that has changed pretty considerably this quarter. Now we're down to negative 4.92 for them, which means that they think that this will be a less profitable quarter than Q4. And really overall, brokers and 3PLs are feeling much less positive than they were last quarter. They've dropped down to 6.97. They're only a hair more positive than carriers overall, which I thought was a pretty interesting development. And it'll be interesting to see how that trends sort of for the rest of the year. And one other last interesting thing about the brokers and 3PLs is that sort of in line with that, their near-term workforce is almost neutral, right? So it's still positive, but they're not going to be looking to grow like they were for much of the pandemic.
Yeah, and I think that goes into one of our headlines. I mean, this morning, right, you look at Uber Freight cutting 3%. You've seen C.H. Robinson make cuts. I mean, you're talking about two relatively large brokerages making those cuts to their workforce now because the conditions don't align with, or the conditions now don't align with what they were hiring in the past. And I mean, it goes into, look at Google. I mean, prime example outside of freight in the tech space that we hired a bunch of people for the economic conditions at the time, expecting that to continue. Well, now they've shifted, and our hiring practices then don't line up with where the economy is now. And I think that's going to be a trend to pay attention to, because obviously it's hitting tech now, but what's it do to other sectors? And freight is it's a target, or not a target, but it's one of those that can be impacted based on how the economy goes. And you're kind of seeing that, especially on that broker side. I think one of the interesting things in that broker sentiment, you have to think about what ultimately they're getting, right? They're getting freight at contract rates from shippers, and they're selling it to or they're buying capacity at spot rates. Well, if carriers are positive on spot rates, but contract rates are coming down, those margins get squeezed. Their profitability ultimately kind of gets squeezed along with it. And that's where you can kind of see that near-term margin squeeze impact them. But Joe, that does it for this week's edition of the Research Corner. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll be in touch with you again next week. Right now, we'll take a quick break, but we'll be back with more FreightWaves Now.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Good day coming.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation, inflation, inflation. This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for a final check of the weather here this morning. We've got snowfall totals and estimated snowfall totals for the winter storm that's set up to bring some pretty impactful weather all the way from the deep parts of the southern plains up in through New England through the rest of this week. So let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. It's pretty easy to tell just based on the snowfall map where this storm is headed. Right now we're watching that heavier snowfall set up across central Oklahoma and into the northern parts of Texas. Eventually we are going to see those bullseyes of heaviest snow move through eastern Oklahoma, up through Arkansas, Missouri, and through Illinois, Indiana. St. Louis going to be a pretty impacted area from this. Could be expecting anywhere between about 4 to 8 inches. Locally heavier amounts will be centered just to the southeast of the city. But we're looking at Indianapolis taking almost a pretty much direct hit from this storm. Total snowfall estimates being anywhere between 8 to about 10 inches for those spots. And then as it continues to move up to the north and northeast, we'll be watching more moisture and then colder air interact, bringing the heaviest snowfall totals along the lake shores of Lake Erie. And that's going to bring, again, some heavier snowfall for the lake shores of Ohio, Cleveland, up to Buffalo, New York, Rochester, and then up to upstate New York as well. Overall, the impact's going to be pretty much centered in this exact area of those snowfall expectations, but we will be watching for some dangerous travel conditions on any of those major interstates. Smaller highways and then back roads in any of these areas obviously going to have issues as well. So just be sure that as you guys are planning out your routes these next few days, you take that into consideration moving through those areas. Going to be quick hitting and quick moving, but impacts could be substantial, especially for those areas in the south that aren't quite used to this much snow. We're going to keep a watch on that as we move throughout the rest of the week. That does it for weather here today. We're going to hand things back over to Isaiah for our final social roundabout.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan. And start things off on a little bit of a weird note this morning. After around 60 years, M&M's is getting rid of their famous spokes candies, the red, green, brown, yellow, all of the M&Ms that they use in their commercials. They're actually doing away with them. They posted this just a couple of days ago, and it says, "America, let's talk. In the last year, we've made some changes to our beloved spokes candies. We weren't sure if anyone would even notice, and we definitely didn't think that it would break the internet. But now we get it. Even a candy's shoes can be polarizing," which was the last thing M&M's wanted, since we're all about bringing people together. Therefore, we have decided to take an indefinite pause from the spokes candies. In their place, we are proud to introduce a spokesperson America can agree on, the beloved Maya Rudolph. We are confident that Ms. Rudolph will champion the power of fun to create a world where everyone feels they belong. And I am a big fan of Maya Rudolph. She's played in several things that I'm fans of. Big Mouth, Grown Ups, there's a lot of things, and she's really cool, but I don't know if she can live up to the legacy of the spokes candies. I mean, apparently they're going to be pursuing different passions now, according to M&M's, but I know a lot of the reasons that they're doing this is because they added a new character, the purple M&M, and then they changed some things with the green M&M, and people were not fans of that. They were trying to make the M&Ms more inclusive, which totally backfired on them, and now they're doing away with them altogether. So hopefully after this indefinite pause will be short and we can get the beloved spokes candies back. Switching things up just a little bit, you've probably had a tougher time at the gas pump. It's taking a harder hit at your wallet. Gas Buddy, Patrick DeHaan from Gas Buddy posted this showing the average prices from several states and showing how they have risen over the last week. I mean, if you look at Colorado, nearly a 30-cent increase at the pump. Delaware, 24 cent. Here in the Freight Alley, it's 16-cent increase. So a lot of states are seeing a big increase at the pump. Hopefully that will not continue to trend upward, and we will be able to not have our wallets hit as hard when we go to fill up our tank. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. And right now I'm going to toss things over to Bill Priestley for our roundtable.
And welcome into the Roundtable. Bill Priestley here with you. And we're going to talk about the bubble that has burst in used truck prices. And joining us, two people that have expert knowledge of this particular subject. Alan Adler joins us, our Midwest Bureau Chief. And to my left, Donnie Gilbert, a resident sonar expert, willing to give us his analysis of this as well. Gentlemen, I'm going to throw up this first chart. that kind of shows where we're going in this place. We had that massive increase all the way through the pandemic. And then now all of a sudden, as you said, Donnie, not too long ago when we did this roundtable last time, normalization, coming back down to earth, as it were. Right now, what do you see things pressing down towards earth? And is this normal? And will it continue to drop after we see these charts continue on in the next few months here in Q1 2023?
Yeah, we're going to continue to go down. I wish I'd have thought about it first here, but I should have backed that chart out just a little bit further. Pre-pandemic, a 3-year-old truck price, which you can see there in blue, was in that $70,000 range. We've peaked and we've come down to the average sale price right now at $104,000. Normal is probably going to be that 70. We're going to get back to that 70. I don't believe we'll go too much lower, and the reason is because with all these trucks that are going to be entering the market, where we saw earlier today where a 50 asset trucking company was selling their trucks back to the market. We have owner-operators that are going out of business. All this is going to affect these sales. And even though the 3-year-old trucks are actually mainly being trucks that are being turned over by these major fleets, who's going to be buying them right now? Things are going to get really tight. It's going to be very tough. And when that supply of truck outnumbers the demand that's going to be needed, then rates are going to continue to go down.
Excellent there. Alan, give us your take. What did you see in the chart and what's driving things down? Perhaps how low could they go in your eyes?
About 20% above pre-pandemic pricing, and that's what J.D. Power Valuation Services uses as their benchmark. So while you're still in sort of positive pricing territory, it's way down from where it was at the peak. Used trucks were about 149% higher in price than they were before the pandemic. So we're rapidly getting back to a sort of a normalization period. I think the thing that I watched closest, guys, was what's happening with new truck production, because the hold down or the inability to build trucks for much of last year really exacerbated the situation with used trucks. Now we're getting more new trucks. We set a record for deliveries in December, and they're starting to eat into this sort of pent-up demand. And as the fleets are able to get a hold of more new trucks, they're able to offload their, quite honestly, their higher mileage used trucks because they had to hold on to them longer than they typically like to.
Alan, are you talking about new truck production, say pre-pandemic, that maybe helped this as well, or are we talking about what we're seeing now with new truck orders starting to rise again?
Well, this isn't as much about orders as it is about deliveries right now. And that is, as they're able to produce them, they're bringing the backlog that they carry. They always carry some level of backlog, but they're bringing that down a little bit. Plus, there's an additional element where there were trucks that just couldn't be built during the pandemic for a lot of reasons, chips, other, kind of whack-a-mole supply chain issues. And now we're getting back to a period where a lot of these issues are either being worked around or being worked through. And so production is up. We saw it in December. And so you can have three things. You've got the orders, and then you've got, your production, and then ultimately deliveries. And so, focusing on the back end, which would be the deliveries and also production, that is creating an opportunity for some of these fleets, especially that have been holding on to older trucks, to get rid of them.
Donnie, let me switch back to you. We've got another chart here that kind of shows how truck sales have gone up in recent times. You can see to the end of this chart, the volume's obviously very low in terms of coming through that time where prices were very high. Now they're dropping. Things are coming back up. In terms of how you forecast yourself, in terms of when is it that you want to buy your next truck, or when is it that you want to perhaps expand your fleet, get into the used truck market? Are you inclined to do that now, or do you want to wait and see if that blue line continues to drop, and maybe wait until you have maybe a better idea what the economy is going to do as it perhaps rebounds? And again, that's uncertain because you don't know if it's going to rebound in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or a year.
Yes, so that's a very hard question, and a lot of people are rolling the dice. They don't know how far down that it's going to go. So here they gamble a little bit, or if they come across maybe a set of trucks that are some very well-maintained trucks that have maybe lower mileage, if you give those up, you may wait 3 or 4 months. The only thing you can have is trucks that are not well-maintained and very high mileage. So where do you draw that line? It's very tough. So So you're going to see these people trying to find these trucks out there right now. They'll pay maybe a little bit more than, what they would waiting 2 or 3 more months, but they might be getting the better deals as some of these larger companies, turn these trucks over. Again, you'll see a little bit of a flood into the market here where a lot of people left the market, didn't come back. But it's going to be a gamble. But I will tell you, what you buy today is going to be worth less in 30 days. And not because you're driving it. Mm-hmm. The simple fact that the amount that the truck is worth is declining every month right now. And that's going to happen probably over the 6 to 8 months. Until it finally.
And Bill, even this year, you've seen about 4.8% depreciation every month this year. Yeah. So Donnie's point is spot on there, and the fact that the guys that I quite honestly feel for, the people I feel for, are those who bought at super high prices. As Donnie mentioned, a lot of those folks have either left the market altogether and sold or ate their truck, or all the money they thought they could make is not there anymore because especially spot rates have reversed, and most of these guys probably didn't have a lot of contracts. So they came in and they bought in high because they thought they could make up that cost. And then wham, they couldn't. And so those guys are back to the sidelines or out of the business altogether. The fleets that are doing well, and I like this point too, Donnie, where you said that, if you can come across a group of trucks, coming off lease, if you will, and you can get them at low mileage, that's great. You're going to pay a premium for that. But a lot of the trucks out there are high mileage. They're not commanding much in terms of, any kind of premium at this point. They're just old trucks with a lot of miles.
So in your analysis there, Alan, where do you think this actually is? Kind of the same question I posed to Donnie a second ago. Obviously, the economy, you don't know exactly when it may come back and how fast it may come back. When do you want to make this investment? When do we see people jumping in and saying, I want to grow my company organically through building capacity, getting more trucks, as opposed to what we've been seeing recently, which is more M&A?
Right. I don't think you see a ton of additional capacity added in right now. I think what you do need to look at pre-buy is going to become a condition here late this year, because in January of 2024, we're going to see new emission regulations in California, and that's going to raise the price of new trucks. So you might see a bit more demand for late model, low mileage used trucks if they're available. But the thing is, the companies, the fleets have been running these trucks for 6 to 8 months longer than they typically like to. That means more mileage, more maintenance, and it gets you a little bit out of that sweet spot of understanding what you're getting when it's coming off lease. So, there's a bit of a gamble there, but any growth would probably be people trying to staff up or just to get equipment up, I guess, if you will, to get ahead of the higher prices, probably $30,000 to $50,000 more for a new truck, that's a 2024, 2025 model because of the emission changes.
Donnie, when you look at the used truck economy pre-pandemic to now, obviously we're kind of returning to that, essentially that kind of economy anyway, but rendered with different parameters and obviously with different levels of demand in the economy itself. What are you looking at in terms of maybe the biggest things, if you're in the market to expand your fleet or pick up, like you say, a couple new trucks that may have, be opportunistic about it? How opportunistic are you in terms of trying to jump in right now? Or do you, like you said, do you wait because the price of a truck is dropping daily? So
right now we wait, and it's not because of the price of trucks. Mm-hmm. It's because we're in the first quarter right now.
Okay.
This would be a time in the normal to maybe try to hire some drivers, sure. Maybe bring in some of those owner-operators that are not able to run their own businesses right now. But I'm pretty conservative. Knowing with seeing the volumes drop, seeing the spot rate drop, seeing the trucking market drop, I'm probably just going to try to hold my own right now and try to make it at least into probably the end of second quarter before I started to get aggressive and start to try and first of all, see what happens in those before I even think about getting aggressive.
Alan, as Warren Buffett, strategy is that when everyone is selling, he's buying. Do you see anybody trying to be opportunistic and try and jump out ahead of this thing, knowing that maybe if they perhaps jump in, they could get a little bit more market share than perhaps they had pre-pandemic?
I think it's much more basic than that. I mean, I appreciate Warren Buffett, and his point is a good one. I don't know if it applies here because I think you're looking at businesses that are trying to, modernize their fleets where they can and in the best way they can. Right now, their focus, quite honestly, is getting new iron, better safety equipment, better fuel economy. PACCAR's out today with its earnings, and they tout that, their new trucks are 7% more fuel efficient than the previous generation. That's saving money. That gets to total cost of ownership and some of the things that they're really focusing on. And I'm with Donnie. I don't think people are rolling the dice on anything right now. I think they're looking at their business and trying to figure out what's the best, most efficient way I can run my business. And if that means, taking the bite and buying some new trucks, which will, by the way, grandfather in against any new emission rules, then, we're looking at, pretty solid kind of approach to running the business.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be very interesting to see how that blue line continues to drop in the not too distant future. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us for this roundtable. We'll kick it back over to Kaylee for a last look at headlines.
All right, Bill, thanks for that. Dry bulk and tanker shipping has seen a rough start to the year with spot rates sluggish for January. However, experts at Jefferies say that the ingredients are in place for a recovery coming, especially after the Lunar New Year holiday. Rates are down mostly because of seasonality and the transient effects of China's new COVID policy, and an upswing will follow. The Baltic Dry Index fell to just 740 points on Monday, its lowest level since June of 2020. And the BDI is down 41% since the start of the year and 87% since its last high in October of 2021. 3 participants in the Louisiana staged accident scam received sentences of probation but no jail time late last week. The 3 were sentenced on charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. All other defendants in the case who pleaded guilty were indicted on charges of mail fraud. There are still a few defendants who are awaiting sentencing later on this year, and the 3 receiving probation will also be forced to pay restitution as well as a $100 special assessment fee. And LTL carrier Pitt, Ohio has added 32 next-day lanes in and out of the state of New York at the behest of their customer base. The expansions come from recently acquired terminals in Albany, Buffalo, Utica, and Watertown, and will help speed transit times to locations through the Mid-Atlantic. One-day times are available from 9 terminals to and from Albany, Buffalo, and Utica. Pitt, Ohio acquired assets from Teals Express last year as well, and those as well, which will be used in those new lanes. And you can find those stories and more up on FreightWaves.com and our FreightWaves app. If you're watching on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe to stay updated. Same thing on all of our social media accounts. And head on over to tv.freightwaves.com to catch up on anything you might have missed from your favorite FreightWaves TV shows. Right now, we're going to toss things back over to Tony and Donnie for our final carrier update.
Welcome into this carrier update, Donnie. Our lanes of the day, we talked about it. One of those markets that we talked about, Laredo. Going to start there, looking at Laredo to Dallas.
All right, so Laredo has its peaks and its valleys. A little bit different than most markets. There's a time period where they're going to peak out for quite some time, and that's starting here very soon, and obviously all the way through produce season. But here we saw Laredo, it's been dropping down since August. This is very normal for them. And then they start to pick back up, and they're at $2.97 right now from Laredo to Dallas. This is a pretty good rate right now for these carriers that are running out of there. As a matter of fact, it did not drop down near as low as it normally does. It should have got down below $2 a mile all in. We see here in August, it was almost $4 a mile. So it didn't drop down quite as bad, but it's picked back up here just a little bit. So this is still a pretty healthy lane. It's 428 miles, and there's not much in between Laredo and Dallas that's going to help slow you down. Maybe a little bit of a tailwind going out and the headwind going in. That's about it. So this is a pretty good lane. So really, if I were curious, by looking at this next chart here and gauging off this, the return rate being $1.94, and that's how this market works. It flip-flops really bad. So right now, rates are really good coming out of Laredo, so they're going to be tough going in. Accept your contracted freight going into Laredo and pick up some of that spot rate right now. And you can run between Laredo and Dallas, Laredo and Houston, and make some very good money. And you can pick up even Laredo to areas like Chicago.
Yeah, because we saw in that chart with Laredo, right? You saw rejections picking up and volume levels picking up. So, I mean, capacity's tightening up. I mean, obviously it's still only at 6%, but it's on the rise, which is you're going to have more spot freight activity out of Laredo based on seeing that increase and seeing overall volumes increase. But guess what? You can get a good rate, a healthy rate coming out of the market, and the opportunity to stay loaded.
Laredo works this way because, number one, what's the next biggest market around Laredo? Quite far. You just don't deadhead into Laredo. Maybe San Antonio to Laredo. That's still quite in a little bit of a ways. That's possible, though. There's not a lot of support for Laredo. So either the capacity's there or it's not. So that's why it really works this way. And when it starts to tighten, it starts to tighten. So you have to get more freight going in there. Let's try to get through one more lane here right quick. Next chart. Cape Girardeau to Chicago, near Memphis. It peaked here just after the first of the year, but it's still at $2.94. It's showing some tightening as well. So this is one that you want to keep an eye on just because of the market conditions that are happening in Cape Girardeau. Reverse this around, coming out of Chicago. Going back to Cape Girardeau at $3.39. Again, this is still a lane that you're averaging over $3 going back and forth. So either accept freight into Chicago. If you're Cape Girardeau, probably finding some P&G freight that you can accept headed to Chicago, and then take your spot rates and bring your truck right back.
Awesome stuff. Thank you as always, Donnie, for the updates today. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
Alrighty, guys, thank you for that. We are done here for your Tuesday morning, but never fret because there's lots more coming up on FreightWaves TV today.
That's right. We're going to have Loaded and Rolling coming up in just a few moments later on today. And of course, shameless plug, we have some Freightonomics coming up today as well at 2 o'clock.
And shameless plug, stay for Freightonomics and then stay for Great Quarter Gals after that at 3. Myself and Grace Sharkey will be here, the #1 show on Tuesdays. I'm taking it from you, Anthony.
Well, you can take it because we're going to move right back to Thursdays.
Oh.
And we'll be back tomorrow morning with more FreightWaves Now. We'll see you then.